Worshipped by their fans, respected by music critics and the world's press, Emerson, Lake and Palmer sold nearly 50 million albums in 5 years, 6 of them top 10 hits. Constantly on tour with some of the biggest and most spectacular concerts ever staged, Emerson, Lake and Palmer created a new genre of music and defined progressive rock for future generations.
You see, it really doesn't matter when you're buried in disguise by the dark glass on your eyes, though your flesh has crystallized.
Today, they remain one of the greatest rock bands of all time, and this is their story.
I just wanted the best damned three-piece band in the world, really.
Anyone would count themselves very fortunate to have been able to do that, you know, to be that.
Classical music that I've been brought up on, played in a rock format, which I love, done.
Being involved with something that was so new, so creative, so majestically put together.
The fact is that they are three very, very clever, talented people, and when they do get together, they produce something that's bigger than all three of them.
We all had our own objectives, and somehow in the middle, we would get it together.
The assembly of ELP and what it was a very conscious thing. It was, in a way, an arrangement.
We've never been mates. We've been business associates. We've been musically connected by just what we've loved as individuals, and we found out that it works collectively.
I think it was my manager at the time, Tony Stratton-Smith, said, well, there's this really good bass player with King Crimson. His name's Greg Lake. And you're going to be actually on the same bill together when you play Bill Graham's Fillmore West. So I went, oh, okay, I'll check him out.
After the show, we met up in the bar and we started chatting, and Keith said, well, how about putting a band together? We both had a lot of respect, I think, for each other as players and musicians.
It was one of those understandings that none of us really, we knew what both of us did, so that said it all, really, you know.
When he and I were together, there was a chemistry, and it's not something you could even really talk about. It just happens.
And that little chat led to lots of chats, actually, quite a lot of talking.
So we got back to England and started to look around, at, finding a drummer. We decided we were going to keep it as a three-piece band.
Well, the phone rang because of a gentleman called Tony Stratton-Smith. I got the call, and would you like to play with Keith Emerson, I think the thing was. I said, oh, that's great. I said, funnily enough, I said, I actually played on the same bill as him not so long ago.
I seem to have remembered seeing him playing in Birmingham.
But the Nice were top of the bill. And of course I saw this guy playing and I thought, oh yes. I just loved the spirit that was there. And so I knew all about it. So I said, yes, I'd love to speak to him.
And Carl came down. We auditioned him in a little room in Soho, I think, I remember.
And he set up his drum kit. And on the bass drum, there was this picture of Noddy. Carl wasn't yet 21. He was the baby, you know. So this Greg sort of like, you know, he's smoking his cigarette and looking at him like very suspiciously, like, oh dear, what we got here, you know.
When Emerson Lake and Palmer started, I was fortunate to go and see them rehearsing, and I remember seeing Carl Palmer, their brilliant young drummer, who I'd previously seen with the Arthur Brown and also with Atomic Rooster. He was presented with the task of playing 21st Century Schizoid Man, which was one of the most difficult tunes that King Crimson had played, which obviously Greg Lake had written and pioneered with King Crimson. And Carl was really quite, not struggling with it exactly, but he certainly gave him a lot to think about, and it was really a hard piece to play.
Carl kicked ass, and I went, you know, I looked at Greg, I said, let's give him a solo here, you know, Bush, okay, oh, look out, you know.
And then I got the call again, and someone, I think it was Lake, called up and said, well, what's your decision? I said, I don't really think I can sort of do this. I said, at the moment, I've just bought a brand new Mercedes van. I've got this happening and that happening. I said, I'm kind of content. He said, well, you know, it's kind of damaging if you don't do this because we think you're right.
It always is a joy to play with great players. They light you up. You know, it's a wonderful thing. It's the same, I think you find with the tennis or anything. When you play with great people, you just become better.
When I went to play the second time, it was great. It was even better than the first. Then the management came on the phone and said, look, you've got to do this. We really want you in there. Now, they tried Mitch Mitchell, I believe. To what degree, I don't know, but his name had been bantered around. I'm not too sure if he actually played. I think I did hear one story about him turning up with a bodyguard and they didn't like that. And Mitch was one of my favourite drummers. I thought, God, if they've turned him down or he doesn't want to do it, I wonder what's wrong, you know. So suddenly I got a little bit suspicious.
And there was actually talk of Keith and myself and Mitch getting together with Jimmy. And then it was talk about being a four-piece band. But that didn't happen, and sadly Jimmy died some weeks later.
Anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up joining them, and that was it.
And Carl spent his 21st birthday on the road with the LP. His mum had bought him a Samsonite suitcase, which was exactly like Greg's, and the suitcases ended up in different rooms. Carl's suitcase ended up in Greg's room. Greg's suitcase ended up in Carl's room. Okay, so Greg couldn't open the Samsonite suitcase, so he's stomping up and down on this suitcase, and finally it snaps open and this pair of drumsticks rolls out, and Greg's going, oh shit, that's Carl's 21st birthday present. Gone.
Now looking back on it, at the time we did actually look for a name for the band, but we could never find one that was right.
I think one was Seahorse, the other one was Triumvirate or something. And I said, well, no, I wanted for us, because we were all soloists and individuals, to just use our individual names. There was no thought about a supergroup title, nothing like that.
And then I think the other thing was that because whenever anything was written about us, it was always Greg Lake from King Crimson, Keith Emerson from the Knights. So our names were always used as individuals.
The very first show they did, they played in a small place in Plymouth, I think it was. And then the next show, where they were launched on the public, was the Isle of Wight. So about 500,000 or 600,000 people. I think it was the same time as The Who and Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan. It was a very, very big, important festival.
The first time I'd been there, I'd seen Carl Palmer playing with Arthur Brown. But this time I'd see Carl playing with the LP, because they were launching their act, their whole career really, at that festival. But the festival was an extraordinary event anyway. As a reporter from the I was covering all 3 days, and I was sitting there in the front row with my notebook and my home movie camera, chronicling the unfolding events on the stage. And it was quite a dramatic festival in many ways. They had Joni Mitchell and Miles Davis and 10 years after, and of course the who were sensational. So they had all these remarkable, diverse groups. I remember Free had their big hit with All Right Now at that time, and that was like the music that you heard all the time. It was like a celebration of rock and roll, and probably the best festival I'd ever been to at that point. And in the midst of all this, ELP had to make their debut, and they certainly did it in style. They knew how to create an instant impact. They had to grab this huge audience. I don't know exactly how many people were there, let's say 100,000 people, stretching out into the darkness over the hills of this extraordinary event. And they did it by letting off two huge cannons. They had these two big brass cannons on either side of the stage, which I think their tour manager had managed to get for them from an antique shop in Chelsea, I believe. This was launching ELP onto the public, and they were a sensation. They went down a storm, and all the other bands, I think, were quite worried about the impact that they were having.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for their first debut performance ever, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer happened so quickly. There was the Plymouth concert. The promoter was Dick Van Dyke, and we got paid £400 for it. I remember it well, like it was only tomorrow. The next day, or within about 3 days after that, we were unknown in Plymouth. 3 days later, we're at the Isle of Wight, and we are now an international group after a 47-minute performance. So you can't ask for anything quicker than that. So it was gone. So I thought, okay, this will be all right.
Well, I certainly did not like the title of supergroup, mainly because for me personally, it put an awful lot of pressure before the band had really got out and tested itself. The objective was to really get my music across and be appreciated.
The roots of our music were far more European, and that we shared, and that was one of the things that identified us very early on.
There was a lot of coming together on a lot of levels with ELP, and for me, I'm not really a songwriter. I'm not really a singer. I can do some vocal backing. What I am, and I decided to be, is a drummer. And I wasn't going to go that way or that way. I was going to be a drummer. And here was a group that could take everything that I've got, all the classical training or whatever I've had, all the experience that I've got, and I could try it out in one go. And I did. And I ran with it, and it worked.
Each of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Greg, Carl, myself, we were all capable of holding our own on stage, which was important for me. It was important to become a group and to merge together, but not so important to really get on with each other. As long as we all had the same understanding, and as long as we could all hold our own on stage, and we were all individual soloists in our own right, then you combine those three things together, then you've got a band.
Let me give you another example, just because I know about it. The Beatles formed, they were all mates, they grew up together. They were almost a band before the bands were even thought of. They were a band that was meant to be. ELP, on the other hand, was a band that was arranged. It was an arrangement that we came to. We were conscious of putting this band together. And Keith and I, having had some success previous to that, had a certain knowledge of, the type of thing we were doing. It was very conscious. The assembly of ELP and what it was a very conscious thing. It was, in a way, an arrangement.
It's a bit like shooting for a goal. You know, you're lucky if it happens.
Musically, completely fulfilling for me, completely fulfilling. Classical music that I've been brought up on, played in a rock format, which I love, done.
After we'd proven the fact that we could actually do it with our first album, I then decided to go a little bit further.
It was probably an idea of Keith Emerson to take classical work, pictures at an exhibition, and to perform it live. He arranged it. I know Greg wrote some songs to it, The Sage and stuff like this. Carl was involved in the arrangement, and the three of them worked it out. And they recorded it at a show in Newcastle at the beginning of their career. And it came out incredibly well, so it was decided to put it out as an album. And Atlantic Records, when they heard pictures at an exhibition, one, it's a long concept album, no obvious singles on it, that it was live, they were horrified. And they said, we can't put this album out. It's, you know, it will be a mistake at this part of your career. So the band, were a little bit taken aback. And we presented the album, I had just started then, to Island Records, because we were with Island Records in Europe and Atlantic in America. And Chris Blackwell, who was the owner of Island Records, he says, oh, this album is unbelievable. We have to put this album out. So we thought, okay. He said, we should price it right because it's live, but I think people will love this album. So we put the album out and it went to #1. And it was incredibly successful. I then get a call from Atlantic Records saying, we need the masters for pictures in an exhibition. So I said, well, why do you need the masters? You're not putting it out. We think we should put it out. I said, well, you said it would be bad for the career, forget it. And then they called back and said, listen, we're being killed by exports. We need to put it out. I said, sorry, you've told the band they're not putting it out. Now you want to put it out? I don't think so. So anyway, Ahmet Ertegun, who was the head of Atlantic, he flew to London, came to meet me, and then we eventually met with the band, and then he decided, okay, we'll put the album out. And of course it was an album that was very successful, was platinum in America, and became one of their classic albums.
The type of shows we did were so expensive that someone had to be aware and able to keep things under control so that those were possible. You know, it wasn't just a matter of going in, practicing your keyboards in the afternoon, walking out on a stage which cost more than the house you're living in. You know, no, someone had to think that through. That person was me. And I spearheaded really what became the management company, which was Manticor and Manticor Records and so forth. However, along that line, we were fortunate enough to meet Stuart Young, who became the manager of ELP, and then he really took it over completely.
And I was working for my father. I was an accountant. They went to see him because they had to set up companies and stuff like this as things were just starting with him. So my father said, well, listen, you better see my son. He's probably on the golf course, but if I can get him off, maybe he can help. And so my task was to find them a manager. And I interviewed and met all the top managers in the world, actually. I met David Geffen, who was managing Crosby, Stills and Nash and Neil Young and people like that. Peter Grant, who was managing Led Zeppelin. And in the end, they decided that they were going to go with Peter Grant. And they had meetings with Peter in London and his business partner. But that fell through because I think Peter at the time was managing Led Zeppelin, and he forgot to tell Led Zeppelin that he was going to manage Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And there was something released in a newspaper. It was a big cartoon, and Peter was a very big guy, so they portrayed him as a whale, and he was swallowing Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and there was Led Zeppelin in it. And that's how Jimmy found out. And so Jimmy said to Peter, forget it. And that was quite difficult at that stage. And so then everything fell through. And so then the band said to me, well why don't you do it? Well, I knew nothing about it. I said, well, I don't know. I couldn't possibly manage. I wouldn't know how to do it. And they said, well, nobody knows anyway. It's a young business. And we know what to do, and we can help. Why don't you do it? So I went to see my dad at the time and explained it to him, thinking he would say, don't do that, whatever you do, don't waste your education, don't waste the fact you've been to university and you're an accountant to go into this. And I thought that would be that. But he said, I think you should do it. I said, what? He said, look, if you don't do it, you might regret the rest of your life that you didn't do it. And I would hate for that to happen. It probably won't last so long. And then you can come back. I'm your dad. So I went back to the band, and then I said, listen, I can do it, but I have to do it in conjunction with my father because I've been working with him, so I would do that. And they said, fine. So we started to manage them, and we would have meetings in the office and stuff, and that's how it began.
Stuart introduced me to Keith Emerson, first of all. And Keith and I hit it off straight away. We both loved motorbikes and flying and women and drinking and later every other substance. And we were out one night, and I remember it very vividly. We were in a nightclub called Tramp then, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And Keith turned around to me and said, this is ridiculous. He said, all day you're very straight, and you wear a suit, and then in the evening we party. He said, if you come and work for us, you can party all the time. And it seemed a very sensible thing to do, and the next day I handed in my notice and started working for the LP. I got involved with the band just after they had written and done Tarkus. So it was of the early 70s to the late 70s, which was some of the most exciting times. My role at Manticor, which was then the record label that looked after the band, was, I think as Keith has said previously, a type of Mr. Fix-It. I'd learned certain life skills and was able to organise things pretty well. And that could be from doing a deal with Yamaha to buy Keith's GX1, to organising recording sessions, or later when the band went as tax exiles to Switzerland, organising their houses, schools, whatever needed to be done around a rock and roll band, and then carrying it on to touring, being on the road with them as part tour manager and part organising everything else around their lives.
Are you ready? Pull your feet
I was at a friend of mine's house. I must have been about 13 years old, I imagine, I think. And we were playing electric cars in his room. And his older brother was always up in the attic blasting music. And one day we heard this very strange music coming from the attic. It caught our attention. And we were like, what is that? What is that? Doesn't sound like any of the music I ever heard before. So his brother would never let us in the attic. So we waited till he left. And then when he left, we went up to the attic and we seen the Brain Salve Surgery album cover there. We were like, wow, look at that cover. I said, we gotta play this, see what this is. So we put it on, and it was that music that we had heard in his room downstairs. And we just played it like 3 times in a row. And it was just amazing. It's just amazing. We ran out and we bought our own copies of the album.
The music business is about perception, and we wanted to be perceived to be the biggest and the best. And sometimes you need more than the music, though that's the core. You need to be able to present something that visually is stimulating, and that's what we tried to do.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer were, unlike a lot of bands actually, were quite conscious of the need to reach out and communicate to audiences visually as well as musically. It was like a whole experience, and if people complained about it, I suppose it was they shouldn't have done really, because all ELP were trying to do with their so-called excess really was to entertain the audiences. And nowadays you'd have, say, an artist like Madonna or a Prince, you know, they have huge elaborate stage shows and sets, so it's quite common and acceptable. But what ELP were doing really was creating the whole theatre rock experience, where you used lighting and effects and explosions, and if somebody suggested having a revolving drum kit, well, why not? Let's go for it, you know, let's do it. And it was all part of the fun, you know, the climax of a show would be this visual treat. So if people thought that they were spending too much money on it, maybe it was the accountants thought that as well. I think the audiences just enjoyed it. But of course a lot of critics thought it was all too overblown and got too far out and too excessive, and there was a lot of sort of politics in rock music at that time, and probably still is, of course, but people do get jealous if they see a band apparently lashing out money on 3 truckloads of equipment, becoming too grand, too big for their boots. So there's that kind of backlash that you get from people who are maybe not so enthusiastic about the music, or just see ELP as yet another group. They might regard them as too clever for their own good. But I thought it was all good fun, and I thought it was really important that when you go to see a show that you do have this whole experience. You know, you don't just want to see a guy standing there holding an acoustic guitar, staring at his boots and singing a few lyrics. You know, you need to put on a show, and that's what ELP did.
The band were incredibly professional. And it was a lot to get through. The sets were often 2.5 hours, very intricate. And Keith used to love, more than anything, of pushing the other 2 faster and faster. So prior to going on stage, everything was very methodical. The boys came off stage, and you can imagine it was, you know, the adrenaline was flying high, and no one wanted to come down, so I'd arrange party time afterwards. And depending if we had to travel the next day, and we used to try to arrange it that, you know, we weren't moving on until at least lunchtime or early afternoon, so that we could enjoy ourselves that night.
There's a lot of untruths. I've heard a lot of, lobsters in the bath and all this kind of stupid. No, it wasn't like that. Every day was unbelievable. That's what it was like. There wasn't a single day which wasn't extraordinary. You'd be going from one day to the next and it would just be unbelievable. That lasted for probably 6 years. We took very little time off. Of course, especially towards the mid-70s, it was what you would expect. Private jets. It was, as you said, everybody had their own car, and it was luxurious in that sense. But it was never, I have to say this, there were never televisions thrown out of windows. It was never at all abusive or in bad taste in that sense. It was never rock and roll in that way. We're pretty civilized human beings, and I think we could have certainly been a lot more if we were really getting into that rock and roll madness. We could have certainly been 100 times worse than we were. There were a few. There will always be stories. You'll hear one where the roadies glued an entire room of furniture to the roof. These things happen, but that wasn't the norm. I have to say, wasn't normal.
I was a silly boy at one point, and that's, you're suddenly out there on the road, and things happen. I went through a short period in my life where I was doing a lot of the marching powder, but only for a year, and also, never before doing a concert. No, I decided to stop indulging in any hard drugs like that. Oh gosh, it was, when was it? I think it was about 1978, 77. And I was very friendly with Alvin Lee, the guitar player. And he was staying with me in the Bahamas. Then I was renting a place. And we thought we'd have one final bash and then we'd knock it on the head. And it was January the 13th we decided, but then Alvin said, oh no, 13 is unlucky. Let's wait till the 14th. So that was it, we stayed up until about 6 o'clock in the morning in the Bahamas, and we're doing this stuff, and we both decided to swim back to England from Nassau in the Bahamas, and we waded into the sea. It's amazing we're still alive, really, and we both looked at each other. We're like way out in the ocean, swimming with our clothes on. We just went, nah, this is stupid, let's go back in. And that was it. I had one little relapse after that, and which really, I said, no way, this is completely stupid.
At the height of their fame, yeah, they were extremely excessive. I mean, if anything new came out, any kind of new equipment, lights, anything, they ran and got it. They had to get everything. Anything that came out, they wanted to be the first band to do it, or to have it, or to use it in any form they could. They were always over the top.
I decided, I was sponsored by Ludwig Drums at the time. I asked them to make me a stainless steel kit. I finally got one from them now. Now the company's 100 years old, there may be a beautiful stainless steel kit. They didn't want to do it. So I said, okay, well, I'm leaving then. And my first endorsing program. So I thought I'd got to leave Ludwig, and it was a wrong decision, but I was a bit boisterous at the time. I said, stainless steel is the way to go for drums. That's the sound I like.
He had contacted British Steel, I believe, and asked them to make a drum kit for him.
Somebody at British Steel said, yes, we could make you cylinders, Mr. Palmer, at the depth and length you want. Yes, and we could definitely work out something with you. Yes, we know Emerson Lake and Palmer. Yes, no problem whatsoever. Now, just tell me, there would be a small charge on this, but it'd be next to nothing, probably some transport, we're not too sure. Would you like the shells 1/4 of an inch thick or 1/2 an inch thick? I turned around and said, I'll take them 1/2 an inch thick. Of course, not thinking that the bass drum at 28 inches diameter took 2 people to lift it with a body belt. I mean, that's when I was excessive.
Terrific jazz drumming from Carl Palmer there. 8 different engineering companies were involved in the manufacture of this kit, which is the very first electronic stainless steel drum kit in existence. And as you see, as we get closer, it's beautifully decorated as well, because Carl had the idea of commissioning from a jeweller, Paul Raven, these very nice engravings. Raven did it for 6 months with a dentist's drill. There's a peacock, there's a beautiful squirrel, nibbling away there on another of the drums, there's a fox. Really nice they are, and there's even somewhere, I think, a hedgehog. Yes, there it is. Now, Carl got the idea of these pastoral scenes from the engravings on antique hunting rifles. The oriental gongs were made for him by a manufacturer in Switzerland, and the dragons were copied from a Japanese vase. They were painted by an art teacher in Fulham called Charlie. Well, that's the background.
Matter of fact, one night, I believe it was in Wisconsin, or Memphis, I forget where it was, but the stage actually collapsed because the drum set was too heavy. It took 2 people to lift up the bass drum. And he only used that set for the brain salve surgery tour, the Works tour, and then he retired it. And it was in storage in his garage for years. And I think it went up for auction. And one of Ringo Starr's people bought the drum set, and I believe that Ringo still has it to this day.
Brian Magoo was a personal roadie. We each had one guy who basically looked after our immediate needs. You know, if you want a drink, or you need a towel, you need this, or something like that. So everyone, and the guy who looked after me was called Brian Magoo. I got an electric shock in the head from a microphone one day. After that, we decided to have a rubber, everything should be on rubber, because it could kill you, you know. We put the rubber mat down, and it looked horrible on the stage.
So he needed to have something to stop the shocks. And so he thought, well, let's get a nice Persian carpet.
So I said, can we cover it with some carpet? So Brian said, sure. I said, just go out and get a nice carpet, piece of carpet to cover it, thinking he would just get like black carpet or something. Anyway, turns out he comes back, he's got over his shoulder, he's got this huge carpet. And he said, look at this. And he rolled it out. And it was this spectacular Persian carpet. Well, the tour was moving too fast. You know, I would have told him to take it back, but it was, it's not enough time. So, and it looked nice,
And Greg still uses it to this day. He uses this carpet, the same carpet. And when he's not using it, it's on his floor in his living room in his house. And he walks on it every day.
You're in a group, a real group, when no one sits on the fence. If you're in a group, well, there's 3 of you, 4 of you, 7 of you, and there's one that doesn't say something or just agrees every time, you want someone who can put an argument forward, can come up with reasoning, can come up with a suggestion, can come up with an alternative. You need someone who's solid, apart from being good at what they do. Somebody's got a clear perspective.
During the course of ELP, there were numerous conflicts, almost always about music. Different who would want to do this and who wouldn't want to do it and this and that. But I believe that's the hallmark of a great band.
If you can get 3 people that are opinionated, like we are, and like we were, as strongly as what we are, and we've all got our different, directions in life and values, completely different. When you get that, you get some magic. You've got to understand that ELP never really argued over women or money. We only ever argued over 4 bars of music.
I think at that particular time, when I was writing my piano concerto, I was bothered by probably a certain critic that may have said, well, Keith Emerson, all he's reliant upon is playing other people's music and ripping off the classics. Yeah, that did bother me, because I knew that I was a composer. I composed pieces like Tarkus and Trilogy, which weren't derivative from any other classical piece or any other piece of music that I'd heard.
I just allow my mind to wander over improvisations at the piano, at the keyboard. I don't know, I have a feeling inside me. It's not a question of visuals or whatever, it's just a feeling inside me, and it's an effect, and I try and live that effect, which I'm after. So if I'm writing to a strict form like a fugue, I prefer to sit down with manuscript paper and work it out mathematically. After I've created that, it's the most incredible high. I mean, I can just walk around, I'm floating on air, you know, and just living off that sensation.
With that objective in mind of proving myself as a composer, that I sat down at my Steinway grand piano and started writing the piano concerto.
I think at the time he probably felt he had done as much as he could with synthesizers, and the only way to move things forward was by doing something different. And so he insisted on going this orchestral direction.
I think Greg and Carl were slightly concerned that, oh dear, he's leaving, he's going to go, you know. And I will say that my intention was probably to go that route at that point, to concentrate more on being a composer and going and just moving further ahead.
I didn't feel it was right for ELP. I thought ELP was best as a 3-piece band. That was where it was unique, that was where it was powerful and free-flowing. I could see that once we became involved in working with orchestras, there was going to be a limitation, there was going to be a type of government on the way we could perform and the freedom with which we could perform. And I could also see the financial implications.
It was Keith's idea. We all went along with it. I immediately jumped on it, and I recorded a percussion concerto, which later got released on an album of mine, an anthology album. He recorded his piano concerto. Greg recorded X amount of things. Then we said, oh, we better record something together.
But all things considered, that was the way it had to go. So I'm not saying, you know, rather than not do it and not make an album at all, I'd rather make an album with the orchestra.
So the Works Volume 1 album comprised of one side which was Keith Emerson's piano concerto. Greg Lake wrote a side full of songs which included orchestration, beautiful orchestrations, and Carl did a mixture of sort of jazz. He worked with a guy called Harry South and orchestration as well. So you had 4 sides to the album. Each had a side, and the 4th side was the group together, and they wrote a piece called Pirates, which they orchestrated. I remember Lenny Bernstein, when we were in the studio, came and saw him in Paris, came to listen to Keith's piano concerto and Pirates. He loved Pirates. The lyrics he loved the idea.
And of course, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but when it was finished immediately, what do we think? Got to go on tour. Let's go on tour. It's time.
Stuart he wasn't that committed to the whole idea, but he said, if you do want to do this, and it's the only way to go forward, then I'll approach Ahmed Ertegun at Atlantic Records, and we get an advance from Atlantic.
The Works tour with the orchestra was probably the closest thing to burning £50 notes, which we didn't have in those days.
When you take out a full orchestra, it's not cheap by any means. You have to pay them, feed them, travel them, and when you have 100 people and trucks for galore, it was the biggest production. When it went into Louisville, which was the first show, we broke the stagehand record for the most paid to stagehands. Technically, it was very difficult because you had to mic these the violins, and they had beautiful violins, and they were worried about it. And we broke the barriers in technical issues, which had never been done before. It was pretty magnificent, but it was pretty expensive.
All intents and purposes, though we weren't the first band to do it, I think we did it very, very well. We had a great sounding orchestra and we had a great time. The actual financial part of it was absolutely horrendous. Horrendous. I know exactly what it cost us to keep on the road.
What did it cost?
Cost colossal amount of money. In dollars, it was something like $200,000 a week.
They almost did go bankrupt. I mean, it was thousands and thousands of dollars a day. They rent out whole hotels, 2 or 3 floors. They had 200 or 300 people on the tour. They had their own doctor. They had 1 tractor trailer just filled with extra equipment that was never opened.
But in my opinion, I think if somebody goes to a record shop, as they used to do back in those days, there were record shops, and they bought a record, and then you go out. You want to see what you want to hear that music exactly the same way as it is on the record.
All right, we're going to give you pictures and exhibition.
And I remember people were speaking to me and saying, Andrew, we've got to tell Keith, we've got to stop this, we've got to stop this. And I remember talking to Keith about it one day and saying, you know, it's just so expensive taking all of these people round. And he sat there and he said, you know that no one has an idea what it's like for me to walk out on stage and play with 80 people behind me. And I personally then found it very difficult to argue with him because I thought, yeah, that must be pretty, and I don't play an instrument, but that must be pretty cool.
You know, it's like you sign a check, that's it, it's a promise to pay. That's what an album is, it's a promise to pay back. And that's why we did it.
I think it was after like a dozen shows or 15 shows, they had to drop the orchestra. And the main reason was because the orchestra was in the union and they weren't allowed to travel more than 200 miles a day. And that messed up everything.
Now the orchestra was interesting because we had auditioned from music schools, a lot of young people. And we took the leaders of the instruments were great players. So the first violinist, the trumpet, etc. All the sections we had professionals. But the rest were kids. And it was their first opportunity. So when we told them, sorry, we can't do it anymore, there were tears everywhere. It was terrible. And I went to my room, and that night I remember there was a knock on my door, and there was a bunch of the musicians were there, and I thought, oh, they're going to hang me. But no, they were saying, listen, we're so sorry. We love this so much. We had a meeting and we decided that we would continue the tour for nothing. Just pay our food and travel. We're having such a great time. So I thought, oh, the tour is saved. But it wasn't, because the union, the American union, said, no, sorry, you have to pay them. Scale, that's the law. We can't break it. So I tried my best, but you can't argue with a union.
But what was wrong with it? I think we'd taken too long off to record all of this stuff, and then to go out with an orchestra straight away was wrong.
So we had to have a meeting with the band, and I explained it. Guys, this is not working. Financially, we're going to lose, I can't remember, $3 million or something like this. So I said, we have to go. You have to go back to three-piece and pay it back.
So it wasn't a big loss, it wasn't a failure. And if we hadn't have gone out afterwards to put the books straight, as it were, because financially we still paid for this orchestra for 6 weeks, though we only used them for 3, we'd still have been okay because of the different areas that came from it, such as a film, such as a soundtrack, whatever.
The concerts we played with orchestra sold less tickets than the concerts we played as 3 people. That's a fact.
There was a lot of work that was done, a lot of high-end work, a lot of great work, but maybe our surroundings and what was going on around us was just too much for us to take. I think we all thought that orchestra thing was going to be bigger than big, and we probably thought we would tour that for a couple of years. That's how big it would have been. But it was probably too soon, really, to have done something like that.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. So glad you can attend, and inside, from inside. There behind the glass stands a real famous glass. Be careful as you pass. Move along, move along. Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. It's the show, you'll get your money's worth. The greatest show in heaven. show. It's a dynamo. You gotta see this show. It's rock and roll. Like fire eyes, we pull out from the sky. Laughs until he cries, then he dies, then he dies. All inside, show's about to start. It's guaranteed to blow your head apart. You gotta see the show. It's a dynamo. You gotta see this show. It's rock and roll.
I would have liked to not have done it, I'll be honest with you. At the end of the day though, it was a great thing to have done. And it was probably the beginning of the end then, I would have thought. I didn't feel too comfortable about the situation then because I think we were veering too far away from what we actually were, which was a trio.
After that, there were no more big albums for ELP. It was the turning point for ELP from big platinum selling success to niche records which didn't sell very many copies.
The orchestra wasn't a success, as big a success as what we'd liked it to have been. You've got to realise now, you're dealing with a band of like real spiky individuals, completely different, who have had success given to them immediately on a plate with their second concert at the Isle of Wight, international fame overnight, and now you're getting to the nitty-gritty where you've got to fight. And you're getting to a situation where music's changing, and radio. Punk is coming in, it's coming to the end of our period, and we're not getting played on the radio, and so the situation has changed. Now, you either stay by your guns and keep on doing what you do, or you can buckle. And we buckled, I personally think.
Sweet those blues outside the door. You won't need them anymore. I'm coming to you. I must have been a fool before. Now all I want is you.
It was actually Ahmed Ertegun's idea because we sat with him in New York and he said, why did you guys just go into the studio and just come up with something short, 3 minutes, we put it on the radio.
We had broken up, it was all over, it was done, it was dusted on the shelf. Ahmed Ertegun, God bless him, came round and said, guys, give it another go. So we were so tired, we said, yeah, okay, let's do it. Where shall we do it? Oh, let's do it in Nassau so we get a bit of time on the beach.
All three of us said, we really feel we need a breakaway from ELP. We want to do some solo stuff for a while and then maybe come back later after we've re-energized. And Ahmet said, no, you owe us one more album, and if you want a solo career, you'll make this record. It was that blunt. And so we said, well, you know, if it's going to be like that, we'll make the record. And having made that decision, we tried to do it, you know, in good faith and make as good a record as we could.
It was a brave attempt to make a crossover from being a progressive rock band into getting radio playable material.
I mean, how can you make a prog album living in Nassau, the Bahamas, and then call it Love Beach? Doesn't that tell you there's something wrong?
But there was a reason for it, because Love Beach was actually a beach opposite Compass Point. So I went, okay, that's the location. It's a bit like Abbey Road, calling your album Abbey Road. Okay, we called this one Love Beach because we actually recorded it at Love Beach. The album cover was quite quite funny.
At the time, I think I had a house on Nassau and so did Keith. So the two of us, it was convenient to record there. So that's how the record got made in Nassau, at Chris Blackwell's studio, recording studio. That is, of course, well, Oliver's got bloody suntans and, you know, we're very fit and suntanned and looking gorgeous, you know.
And we rode out to this island, little tiny island, and had a photographer with us. And then we posed with the setting sun, you know.
I mean, it looks like the Bee Gees, doesn't it, that cover? You look at it and you think, Jesus.
Well, he's quite right. I mean, it is laughable.
Tie it all together, Love Beach, the Caribbean, underneath the palm tree, suntan, look, you know, that's what it looks like.
And I suppose if you talk about socialising, when the band was over, which was that period, you probably socialised the most ever. I remember going out with dinner with Keith. I remember going out I bought a boat. Keith, I used to go water skiing with him.
Well, Carl had his boat. It was called Porky Pig. My boat was called Fingers. And I think Greg was going to get a boat and call it Spud, as I remember, because that was all our nicknames.
But we did it, and that was it. It was the wrong thing to do, and I think if everyone was absolutely honest, they would say that. There are some good tracks on that album. There's one of them which wasn't written by us, by Rodrigo, Canario. I thought was sensational, you know. And there's some good playing on it, you know, but it's not what it's all about. The pinnacle of the artistic input, of really where it went, wasn't Works 1, was Brain Salad Surgery. That's when we'd done it. That, Love Beach, was just, you know.
Walking through the city after recent rain, heard ancient stones all shining, murmur, where are they?
There's a friend of mine called Martin Darville. And Martin Darville was very friendly with a promoter in England who wanted to put a classic rock festival together.
Around the summer of 2009, Keith and Greg had started writing again, late summer I think it was, that Keith was in the country, and they'd started doing a bit of writing together, which was great. And we were mooting the idea of Keith and Greg going out together as a duo and you know, just throwing ideas around. When I think it would have been mid-October, 2009, Steve Foster, who was head of the live department, he was in charge of all live stuff at the Mama Group, he got in touch and said that they were starting a new type of festival. It was a classic rock festival. It was called High Voltage, but it also catered for prog bands. So it would have a classic rock stage and it would have a prog stage, and everybody there would be a kind of cross between progressive and classic rock. This was going to be a long weekend with top classic rock bands on the bill. And they wanted, to cut a long story short, they wanted ELP to close it. Were ELP up for a 40th anniversary reunion in London, playing in front of fans from all around the world. So I spoke to Stuart straight away.
And when Martin mentioned it to me, I said, no, I can't believe they will do it, you know, because they don't want to work together. So Martin said, well, should we try? Well, why not?
Literally within an hour, we contacted all three, and Carl and Greg and Keith. And
to my inordinate surprise, they agreed to do it as a one-off show.
Festivals in general, for me, have always been a mixture of apprehension, because you really are at the mercy of the elements. You know, if it rains, ELP have always used concert halls as an extension of their instruments. We use the acoustics. Of course, at festivals, you don't have that opportunity. There's no chance of a sound check. And with my equipment, you really are at the mercy of is it all going to work?
I felt excited because I could see the beauty in having ELP reform back in London, where it all began really for us, and playing this to show, nostalgia, I suppose. I could see the power of the nostalgia. I could see also the beauty for people who'd never seen the band, younger people, their one chance to see this legendary band from the past.
I enjoyed the nostalgia part of it immensely. I thought it was really great to give the fans something back like that after all that time, because we hadn't been around for 12 years. It's a long time. It was the 40th anniversary, was the first time ever for a festival dedicated to prog rock, and we were on it. So I felt really good about that.
Stuart Young phoned me and told me that the band were getting together to play this concert.
Well, first of all, I was stunned, and then I was delighted to hear that they were going to do it. I didn't think they would, because there was so much water under the bridge, and they all had their different projects. They had all been working on different bands, and it seemed that the problems were intractable, that they would ever actually get back together. And so it was great news, especially for all their fans around the world.
When I heard that they were getting back together to do that one-off show at High Voltage, I was extremely excited.
I was excited instantly. It was like turning back the clock, and I planned the whole weekend. I took my wife and my young daughter, my 15-year-old, and we were going to go to the concert, and I got all the backstage passes, and it was fabulous for me.
I went right to the internet and got my flight, my reservations, my hotel. I got everything.
You go and see a spectacle like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You see the explosions, whatever they've got going on, and I think the one thing that we were a little bit worried about was that we wouldn't be able to deliver something that ELP could deliver in its prime. The spectacle, the event status of it.
I realised we hadn't been performing together for many years, and that the musical bar for ELP is high. We're performing music at the age of 60 and plus that we created at the age of 20 plus. So some of this music was hard to perform physically, and just hard to perform. So it wasn't just a question of doing 5 days rehearsal, jump on and play ELP as you did when you were 20. That part of it I realised would take some considerable work to achieve a level of performance that did justice to the legend of ELP. We really needed to set up as we would on a very big festival stage. It wasn't the sort of thing we could do in a little rehearsal room. We had to be set up really as we were going to perform.
When you're a musician, there's a certain time that you have when you're rehearsing, when it's there. And I want to be always at a point where I know what I've got to play, but I've really got to concentrate to make sure I play it at a high level. And then there's a certain amount of kind of anger, aggression, enthusiasm in your playing, because you really want to get it right. You don't want to be, mad. You don't want to get upset with yourself so that you're angry if anything goes wrong. So you really fight to get it right. And I like this kind of tension.
I sensed that the three of them were nervous, apprehensive, but there was an excitement. There was no question about that, and the anticipation in the whole event, and the audience were waiting, and for the three of them to get out and walk on stage again, and You know, just before they went on stage, I was stage left with them, and all three of them. Greg was saying, "I'm nervous," and yeah, it was a big event for them.
So it was a great day, and the nice thing was that when I arrived there were lots of people coming up to me saying, "You used to write about ELP." So I was kind of recognised as an ELP fan as well, which is nice to think that it was like a community of ELP fanatics all gathering to see them.
It was bizarre because it was so similar. There was Greg, his dressing room full up. He was walking around chatting to everyone. Carl, sitting in his dressing room, beating away at his drums, a bit tense, and no one going near Keith. Being on the side of the stage and looking out into the audience was absolutely no different from 35 or whatever, however many years ago it was. I loved seeing the age differences. There were guys, up in their 60s and young kids, and there was an anticipation and a waiting for this event. And apart from 35 years ago, everyone was much younger. It was very similar, and you could feel the electricity.
They put on a great show. The show was amazing. They had fireworks like the old days. And the revolving drum set. Keith had the Moog. Greg had his carpet. They were all ready to go, like they never stopped.
People were waiting expectantly for how good would they be? How, could they really get it back together? And of course we needn't have been worried at all because ELP came back firing on all cylinders.
Everybody was extremely excited. I mean, there were ELP t-shirts all over the place. People were going nuts before they even went on stage.
And it was quite an emotional experience to hear them playing all that exciting music that only they could create.
London! Will you please welcome on stage Emerson, Lake and Palmer! Show. It's a dynamo. Gotta see this show. It's rock and roll. Right before your eyes, with laughter from the sky.
It was very emotional. I spent some very you know, moving, emotive times with those boys, and I was lucky because I was up on the side of the stage next to Keith, where I'd spent so many hours and years watching them on stage, and seeing Keith still turning round during a lick or something and smiling at me was great.
I've never known a festival to go without some sort of mishap.
We were very badly let down with the technology. It was a tough gig to play. Monitors were dreadful, you know.
We were in the wings, and the band before us had run slightly over, and from what I've learned, I think there were some ugly moments with my road crew, which of course got back to me in the wings, which doesn't really help before you have to play, you know, such complicated music.
We did have a problem with time. There was like an hour and a half. It was a Sunday night.
So we were obviously very, very concerned about that we got to get on stage, and we had to get off by 10:30.
We had to get basically what we had, an hour 50-minute set into an hour 30. And of course, stuff had to be removed, and how do you do this and do that?
Oh, I do remember though, that at the end, and Carl hadn't quite got into his drum solo, and I'm looking at my watch, and then Stuart Young, the manager, can you believe this? He comes on stage and he's yelling in my ear, "You've only got 7 more minutes." Right, drum solo, come on, get it, you know. Let's complete the job, you know. Gosh, I mean, we actually did finish dead on 10:30.
But it paled into insignificance when you feel the warmth of the audience. So the warmth and the response of the audience just washes all that stuff away. And because ELP is a good band, we kind of performed through it. We just performed through it. And we're a good band, so we just rode through it, you know. And at the end of it, it was fabulous, and people loved it.
It was a kind of a risk to just come back to play one show.
It was a struggle, but I'm glad that we did pull it off.
But the actual power of the show for the audience and for me was pretty amazing.
The end of the concert was, whew, wow. And part of me wanted it to carry on, and it was very strange being there, because it was like everything was throwbacks to whether it was Madison Square Gardens or Paris or wherever.
There was a huge warmth, and not because it wasn't raining, but there was a warmth between the three in the band. There was a warmth between the band and the fans, and there was a warmth overall. And if there was one overriding memory, it was it was a very happy occasion. You know, there's something about fulfilment that, and at that level, only Keith and Carl and Greg can tell you exactly what it was for them. I mean, the highs that they hopefully rode on that evening, at least part of that evening, and the warmth between the three of them. That people in bands tell me, you know, the successful bands, that there comes a time when you're actually on the stage, and you don't know where you are. You're actually in unison with everybody. You're riding the car together. You're actually all on the same plane together, and you're locked in. I think that's the phrase. So they're locked in. That happened definitely on that evening, that the three of them locked in. And also the audience did as well.
Well, there were many successes in their career. The first show they did, big show, was the Isle of Wight. It was a huge success. That changed everything for them. We also did, we performed at a festival called California Jam. A lot of artists, we were the headliners, and we had 350,000 people pay to come to that show, and it was a spectacular show, and it was on television, and that was probably one of the peaks of their career. And then I remember when they played Madison Square Gardens with the orchestra, and they played 3 nights, sold out. I remember the first night, when you walked in, there was an electric feeling before the band went on stage that was indescribable. And the concert was unbelievable, and people are still talking about that show.
We were saber rattling, we were great musicians, we set an industry standard. The fact that the journalists at the time didn't realise what was going on and called it saber rattling is immaterial, because today what we did is so small in the big picture. When you look at bands like U2, Rolling Stones, the shows these bands have put on.
They were prepared to take chances. The shows were incredibly exciting. When people saw them live, they were hooked.
Looking at the date sheets years later, you realise just how hard they worked during that period, like night after night, travelling all around the globe.
The music was different and was great. And they were just a great band, and they happened right at the beginning, and if they'd have continued, it would have lasted.
And ELP actually lasted a lot longer than many other bands. If you think of Cream, for example, Parallel Case, 3 very diverse, powerful personalities thrown together, making very exciting music, and then breaking up after just 3 years. So ELP lasted a lot longer than Cream, and there was no end to the fact that people all around the world still loved their music and wanted to hear them. So that encouraged them to reunite later on, and let's hope they carry on now. I think they should carry on, personally.
Putting a tag on ELP is always difficult. For me, it's an emotional, emotive journey.
It sounded like classical music, but rock version of classical music. And it just caught my attention. It was just amazing stuff that no other band wrote music like that.
That band appealed to people who appreciated musicianship, really.
I still listen to their music, and it still takes me on this emotional journey, and I can laugh, it's got humour. Keith throws in licks that make you laugh. And then Carl would start his drum solo, and within 3 minutes, 80,000 people standing up, going berserk. And then Greg's voice and guitar playing can draw tears. They're good.
They weren't just another guitar band. That's for sure.
I just wanted the best damned 3-piece band in the world, really, and used all of the resources, including the marvellous invention of Dr. Robert Moog with the Moog synthesizer.
Mm-hmm. ELP had their own boffin who was employed just to come up with new ideas. How can we sequence this? How can we do that? How can we do this? And he was just there all the time. So one day I walked into the workshop and said, do you know what I need? I need a drum synthesizer. Why can't you have something, we can get a sound, build it into a box, the size of a cigar box it would be. I said, I can hit the drum, one microphone can trigger the synthesizer, the other microphone will be in the PA. We'll kind of have the 2 sounds, beginning of MIDI really in a way. And I said, it would be an okay sound. What we need, if we could put it through something where there's an octave changer, what the guitar players use today, like a mitigator. I said, maybe I could drop it down an octave. So every sound has got 2 sounds built in. So if I have one on every drum, I've got something like 16 drum sounds, electronic drum sounds, and I can do it all with a switch on the floor, just 2 switches. Big buttons, please, because my eyesight's not very good.
There were all these possibilities, and we just made the most out of all of the resources that we had.
That was the kind of stuff that we did, but we all did that. We're all looking all the time. And brain salad surgery was where I'd had my time with the boffin and he'd made me something. Nicholas Rose was his name, I remember him well.
I think in the long term, and the way I used to fondly remember the band, is 3 guys setting out to conquer the world and have an enormous amount of fun doing it. And that's the way I prefer to think of them. And I think that's the way their fans think of them too. Because whenever they do get together and they do play, all the rest of it, all the rubbish blows away. You know, the fact is that they are 3 very, very clever, talented people. And when they do get together, they produce something that's bigger than all 3 of them.
Do you know, it's interesting because sometimes I sit here today and I've been looking at old pictures and it seems totally unbelievable. It doesn't seem possible that I went through it all, and I've been pinching myself today looking at old photos of that time and being involved with something that was so new, so creative, so majestically put together, and to watch that band, you know, for instance, see Bill Graham, the great promoter, walk out and announce, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back my friends to the show that never ends, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And butterflies every night would go up and down. And even today, as I'm saying it, I can still feel that same emotion.
They epitomised the band that showed that musicians can actually influence the music industry. That they were the band that really showed the world that rock, classical and jazz music can be combined into this exciting, homogeneous entity that is now called progressive rock. In a strange kind of way, progressive rock itself is now an outdated phrase, because if you're going back into the past, you're not actually progressing. But if Emerson, Lake and Palmer decided to continue in the future, I think that they'd have a lot more to give and a lot more to do, and they should carry on. And I think, yes, their epitaph should be, we started, so we should finish.
If I had to write an epitaph for ELP, I think it would have to be pictures of 3 exhibitionists. Simple as that.
I think any epitaph that I would write would probably be unprintable.
The show that finally ended, I honestly don't know.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think I would let other people do it.
If only. I think the band could have achieved so much more than it did, really. Perhaps that would be true of many, many bands that have come and, you know, I think had we not taken the orchestral turn in the mid 70s, I think the band would have gone on to make a lot more innovative albums. I feel that frustration, you know. On the other hand, I'm very grateful personally to have been in that band and had those experiences. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, you know. It was a privilege and an honor to play in such a great band and to have such loyalty from the fans. It's because I feel that loyalty so deeply that there is an element of me which frustrates me, that, and that's why I said to you, if only, you know. There's things about the history of the band that if only those things hadn't have happened, or something should have happened that didn't happen, you know, I think the band would have been even greater than it was. So there's an element of frustration, there's an element of pride, there's an element of gratitude.
I don't know, it's funny that. I mean, I I just have to talk it up at the time, and I'd have to say that, you know, we came, we saw, and we conquered, and basically we set a standard that really set an industry off on a different path. Because I definitely think we were the first of the great rock and roll shows. I'd have to say it's as long as that, because you can't put it into few words. Because this music we played, we'd taken European music, we had developed it, we'd taken great songs, and you call us a prog band, but to be honest, we were prog for this part. We had hits, C'est la vie, Still You Turn Me On, From the Beginning, Lucky Man. These aren't prog. These are beautiful tunes. We were a complete entity. It's just because there was a Moog synthesizer there and some electronic drums, we were a prog band. It was part of the parcel. It wasn't everything. And I think that's why we were misunderstood, if there is a reason, because we did send out musical messages which were mixed. We were quite eclectic. We have a #1 single with an instrumental, or a #2 single with an instrumental. I read the paper that said #1, by the way. Fanfare for the Common Man. An instrumental. I mean, we didn't write it, but you've got to be clever to choose one and arrange it and know what to do with it. That's a skill. Apart from writing Lucky Man, which was in the top 10 in America, or C'est la vie, which was #1 in Canada. That's a skill. They're nothing to do with each other. But that was it. That was why it was magic. And it was keyboard driven and not guitar, very important. Classical, not blues or rock. You know, we were classically driven with a folk overtone, very strong.
I accept that in the course of a career like that, there's going to be things that, you know, you look back on with hindsight and you say, as I do now, and say, well, I wish we hadn't have gone that orchestral route at that time. Well, yeah, but on the other hand, I've just said to you, ELP brought classical music to the forefront for thousands and thousands of young people, which opened a doorway to a whole musical genre which hitherto they had never had free and open access to. So that's a wonderful thing I feel proud that ELP did. So it is a mixed bag. It's not that I feel totally one way or totally the other. The only thing I do feel totally is I feel grateful that I had that opportunity in life, because it's been a fabulous life.
Extra large parts. Everyone loves potatoes. That's really what ELP stands for.
Anyone would count themselves very fortunate to have been able to do that, you know, to be that. And you do develop an immunity to it after a while, walking on the stage night after night, you know, and you do have to realise, as I do, this is your question about, you know, how much delusions of grandeur. You soon realise that it's not you they're cheering for; it's what they think you are. You know, I mean, you soon learn that. You know, you're just who you are. But I mean, it was a wonderful thing to have experienced all that, and the culture, the countries, going to all the countries, and having a privileged insight into them. You know, because as a rock and roll star, because it's just straight down the Kabuki Theatre. You know, would you like to come backstage and all this? You know. You get to see the world through these very privileged eyes, and I think that is very fortunate.
Do you remember the album, Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends, ladies and gentlemen, Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Well, again, like everything they did, it was class. It was absolute class. They didn't need to have, on that album, it didn't need to have a huge concept at all for the cover, because those words said it all. And you know, they've been used, and they've been pinched, and they've been subverted ever since. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Ladies and gentlemen, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Can't beat it, can you?
I can't come up with anything either. Yeah. Extra large parts. Yes, that works.